Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. In today's podcast, I'm thrilled to introduce you to another remarkable marketing leader and master of personal branding. Our guest, Melanie Diesel, is the co-founder of Creator's Kitchen, an award-winning content creator, a keynote speaker, and the author of two influential books called The Content Fuel Framework and Prove It, Exactly How Modern Marketers Earn Trust. Diving into her decade of experience, we explored the world of personal branding and discussed what marketing leaders need to know to get paid what they're worth. We discussed gaining confidence to pitch and price ourselves, crafting the perfect discovery call, and she broke out her own personal framework, which I super appreciated. Actionable ways that she and I both were able to overcome imposter syndrome, questions to ask during a discovery call to secure the perfect client, and achieving a healthy work-life balance while excelling in your career. So let's make it rain with Melanie. Melanie, welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Let's make some rain.
Yeah, let's make it rain. Actually, specifically, let's make it rain. So right before we push record, I was like, hey, how do you feel about us getting into the mechanics, the practicality of making it rain, literally making money for our marketers? And you are just a really good sport. So let me tee this up. So Melanie, in fact, we just barely, I don't know when it will release. We barely just recorded our podcast episode with one of your collaboration partners, Jay Kunzo from Creator Kitchen, right? But you also have made some dough when it comes to, I'm not going to use the word prostitution because that just seems weird, but like you literally are doing very well in soliciting your brain. Like you get paid for your brain. And I can't even tell you how many marketers that come to me with aspirations to get paid for their brain because they're either getting paid for their time by clocking it in. They're getting paid for rendering services, which is not the funnest thing on the entire world to do. And the mountaintop for a lot of these aspirational marketers who are wanting to make good money is that they want to work with some premium clients and they want to get paid for their brain. And that can be in the version of, consultation gigs and retainers or keynotes or workshops, but it seems elusive. It seems really hard. And damn, your pedigree, the brands that you've worked with is very sexy. So why don't we start with how did you even get into a position where you're doing a workshop for Google and H&R Block? I mean, like, how did you get there to begin with? Can you give us a brief summary?
Yeah. So my background is actually in journalism. So I came up through the media world in the New York area. So I worked with HuffPost, Time Incorporated, which is like Sports Illustrated, Entertainment Weekly, all those fancy brands, and the New York Times. So as part of my jobs at those companies, I was doing a lot of pitching to brands because I was on the advertising team. Pitching to brands. I was speaking at advertising and marketing conferences on behalf of my team and the work we were doing. So when it was time to go out on my own, I already had a decently good connections with some of these folks because I had worked with them in the past. But also I was really comfortable with presenting. I was really comfortable getting in front of people that I should probably be intimidated by and trying to ask them to buy things. It didn't make me good at sales. It just made me comfortable in like a public speaking environment, right?
Yep.
So I knew that I loved that stuff. I loved being able to get in front of an audience, lead a workshop, do a keynote. And so I was really focused on saying, how can I do more of that as I'm on my own? Because that was the part of my job I loved most, in addition to like writing and creating, my sort of first love. So it really was just a concerted effort of like roughly 6 months before I knew I wanted to go out on my own. I started laying the groundwork, reaching out to connections, applying to speak at conferences because you do a lot of paying your dues early up. You're often not paid for a lot of the early work that you're doing when you're speaking, but being really strategic about using those unpaid gigs early on to get connections, to get great footage of me speaking, great images of me speaking, and just get at bats so that I was getting better at the craft. So honestly, I really focused on the stage at first. And then the more I did that, the bigger percentage of my revenue it was able to become.
Oh my gosh, you and I have a very similar background. I did a crap load of free, let me emphasis, free at my personal expense marketing conferences when I had my agency, but also when I was working for corporate, they would put me on stages as their representative. So that's
Yep.
where I'd start like cutting my teeth. And
Mhm.
then when I jumped into like real, not side hustle entrepreneurship, but like full time entrepreneurship, I already had that level of confidence. And so then I started pitching to the free marketing conferences to pick up agency clients. So like I'm tracking with you. I had a very similar experience and I'd be flying myself out on my dime. But I did everything that you were doing. I was leveraging the tape, I was leveraging the images, I was doing everything I could to like use it and abuse it as much as I could, right? Like
Yeah.
one great headshot like at a time.
At a time. Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's start with pitching because that immediately I was like, nah. This is, and I'm not trying to be gender specific in saying this. I have found, however, that when working with my female marketers, we do a very great job at discrediting how experienced we are. I think better than our male counterparts. It's a real
Mhm.
skill.
Yeah.
But pitching is uncomfortable for so many. So when you say I pitched myself, I know that you already had some connections, but let's say like a cold pitch. How did you, this was before ChatGPT that could write it for
Right.
you. How
Yeah.
did you like muster up the confidence and like the female cojones to do it?
I'm going to be really, really
Please.
honest and say that I still don't think I've mastered that. The best scenarios for me where I do the best is when I get a warm introduction.
Sure.
And so when I'm able to have someone who's seen me speak, someone who's worked with me, heard me on a podcast, and they say, hey, can I introduce you to my boss or can I introduce you to our department head? Those scenarios I feel a lot more comfortable
Mhm.
personally because I feel like I've had someone else vouch for me before I even get in the room. And so in that instance, I don't feel like I have to prove myself as much.
That's
I feel like I've
awesome.
earned the right to be there, right? And then I'm able to just talk openly about what I can do to help. I don't feel like I have to sell myself quite as much. A cold pitch scenario, like I'm deeply uncomfortable with
Yeah,
having
man,
to
it's
talk.
uncomfortable.
It
Yeah.
is, and I think I'm going to be totally honest that I'm very lucky. My husband is an entrepreneur as well,
Mm.
and he is the absolute best hype man, wingman. Like the best thing is when I can go to an event or something with him, and he's able to do that bragging for me, right? To like
Aw.
kind of make that warm introduction,
Yeah.
so that I'm able to come in without having to brag about myself or feel uncomfortable. He can say the nice things, and then I can come in and sort of show up as the expert. But I haven't figured that whole thing out, to be
Yeah.
honest. I think you're absolutely right. I still have a really hard time
Mhm.
talking about myself. Even like, when I join a conversation like this and someone's reading my intro the whole time, I'm like,
I
oh,
know.
this is
Make it
so
stop.
icky. Like,
Yeah.
don't talk about me anymore.
Yeah. This is why I don't do the intros in front of the guest because
It's
I
so hard.
also as a podcast guest would just squirm. I'm like, stop, stop. It
Hmm.
reads way cooler than I am. Please make it,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so okay, fair. Now you brought up proving. This is like I'm gonna go off on a tangent, so let's go. But I was just talking to somebody about this. I too have a very supportive partner, and it means the world to me and then some because on those low moments, he's like, come on, you're great, right? But
Mhm.
I'm now in my 30s, mid 30s. But if I really know, right? But if I reflected back at my 20s in my career, there was so much proving energy. Oh
Oh
my
yeah.
gosh, there was so, and I didn't have the words to define it like that,
Hmm.
whether and it could be misdiagnosed like, oh, imposter syndrome
Yeah.
or, self-confidence, insecurity, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But if I really now with I guess any wisdom I've gained at this point, with the wisdom of my
Yeah.
age now, it really felt like there was so much proving energy to prove myself
Oh
to
yeah.
myself more than even to anyone else, which is
Yeah.
wild. When did that start to shave off for you, or has it not even shaved off? I'm
Yeah.
curious in your own journey if you were kind of like conscious of this.
So I don't know. This is like my specific flavor of delusion, I think, or my specific flavor of imposter syndrome. But
That's awesome.
I've been really blessed that I know my worth. I know
Awesome.
my skills, and I know I'm really, really good at the work that I do. Where I am less good, as we just discussed, is sort of bringing that up out of the blue
Mm-hmm.
or having to assert myself. So, a couple of things. I mean, again, I'm really all about just acknowledging those weaknesses and
Mm-hmm.
working with it rather than trying to overcome like who I am as a core human. One thing that I found really easy for me is when I'm advocating on behalf of someone else, I find it a lot more comfortable.
Mm.
And I know that that's true for a lot of women. I've heard that many, many times when I share that. So, what works for me is to sort of flip the script and to be talking about whether it's the audience that I'm helping, whether it's their customers that I'm helping, whether it's their employees that I'm
Mm.
helping, to come in and say, I'm going to help your employees save this much time rather than I'm going to help I'm going to make you this much more effective. It's really like, how can we help your employees, your customers, your audience, allowing it to be more like I'm advocating for them in terms of the outcomes we can create together rather than talking about my own skills makes it easier for me. Um, I definitely had crippling imposter syndrome. Probably up until like 2015 or so.
Yeah.
I was very blessed from a timing standpoint. My role at the New York Times, I was their first ever editor of branded content. So that was an incredible
Yeah.
opportunity. It was also a tremendous amount of pressure. Like industry press was writing about the fact that my role and my team existed. Like even people within the organization were like, "We don't want you here. Like, why are you doing this?" Like because they felt like I was jeopardizing the credibility, right? If we're creating sponsored content, that could undermine what the editorial work is. And as a former journalist, I fully understood it. But it was a tremendous amount of pressure.
Mm.
And so I remember many times being at my desk at like, 10 o'clock at night, because obviously I was working unhealthy hours to overcome my imposter
Naturally.
syndrome, as you do. And being like, they're going to find out any day now that
Mhm.
I mean, what was I at the time? I was like 25 years old and I had like an insane amount of budget under my, it was just, I couldn't believe that I was allowed to do what I was doing. And I knew I was qualified,
Yeah.
but it still felt like the jig was going to be up
Yeah,
any
yeah,
moment.
yeah.
So I don't think that started to go away until I had enough external points that I could point to as like proof points, which, my last book is proof it. It's about, using content as evidence until I felt comfortable enough that it wasn't just me saying I'm good at this
Mhm.
and you should believe me. And it was, I have this award and I've worked with these clients and I have all these external proof points that can help kind of bolster me up,
Mhm.
that I felt a lot more comfortable standing there.
Yeah, you gotta have the receipts, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I hear you. When I was working at ancestry.com, I'm like, I'm the 20-year-old that's like sending out 6 million emails a week. Like, who gave me
Hmm.
this job? Like, who thought this was a good idea? Like,
Yeah.
so I definitely, yeah, it was interesting. And I was there at like 10 o'clock at night watching Iron Chef America deploying emails.
Yep.
Like, this was my
Yep.
life, right? And getting the receipts, the professional receipts is one thing. The other thing that I was given advice on early was like the sunshine folder. So there's the CYA
Mm,
folder, right? Cover your ass. But then
yep.
there's like the actual like sunshine folder where like if somebody sent you a positive email or sent you positive feedback, if in the Slack or wherever it was in Outlook back in the
Mhm.
day, I would try to like screenshot it or put it in the sunshine folder. So like on those hard days, I'd go through my folder and be like, yeah, some people thought I was great. Like, just make
Mhm.
myself feel better. I don't have to do that as much as I used to because I feel like I've done a better job at me loving me.
Now you've got them.
But
Yeah, mine was like a poster habit. So this was again back in the day. We
yeah.
didn't have Canva back then. We had to design our own like shoddy inspirational posters. So my sunshine folder equivalent is when I got a quote from someone I really
Yes.
respected that meant a
Yes.
lot to me. I would often sort of design that out and hang it at my desk. So I have like the advice, right? If I look up from my desk, like, what am I doing here? I'm like, oh yeah, remember that person said I
Yeah.
belong
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like at first, before you learn to self validate at first, it means a lot when somebody says, hey, kid, you're doing a good job. You're like, yeah, oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Because I was incapable of doing that for myself. Now
Yeah.
I'm much better with thank you therapy and doing that for myself and seeing like even if somebody was unhappy with me, sometimes that's more often a reflection of them and their state than it is in
Oh
anyway.
yeah.
So I've gotten much better, but it takes some time. Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to take me to the room because I'm in a similar situation. I know a lot of the other marketers that I get to mentor are as well, that we are all the beneficiary of like great relationship marketing or great word of mouth where somebody's speaking on our behalf in a really positive light. We now
Mhm.
have this, set up Zoom date. How do you go from a Zoom date or an intro of some kind to like I'm going to now charge you thousands of dollars? Like
Mm.
take me through that process if you have one, or take me through that bridge because that can
Yeah.
also be an area of discomfort even when there's a warm introduction to start it off with.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say that the way I do it is the right way. But what I do know is, like I said, I'm good at acknowledging my weaknesses and
Mhm.
trying to work with them. So, one thing that I know is that if I'm asked on the spot to give pricing, even if I know how much the thing costs, I will inevitably phrase it in a way that is downplaying my value or,
Mm.
but if that doesn't fit your budget, let me know. I have that inclination to make people comfortable that I'm
Mhm.
going to backpedal. So I always say from the upfront that I will follow up with a formal proposal and pricing, because that way I know after the call, I can put it on paper, I can take my time, and I can send it with confidence.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I do to work
Love
around
that.
that. The other thing that I do is I try to spend more time asking questions than saying things. When I get into a room, I want to know, what's the problem we're trying to solve?
Sure.
What have you tried already? If this worked, what would that do for your team? If you had this outcome, if you had this desired result, what would that be like? What would that improve? What would that save you? I'm really trying to agitate the problem, but in a way that I'm discovering it, right? Because a lot of times people have a vague idea of what they need, but they're thinking about the solution more than they are thinking about the problem. They're
Mm.
like, a consultant, surely a consultant will fix this, some consultant of some kind, or we need a workshop. A workshop will take care of everything. And that's wonderful, but the only way I can show up and deliver value is if I actually know the problem we're trying to solve.
Mhm.
So I spend a lot of that first call really just asking questions and making them feel really, really heard. And that way, toward the end of the call, when, time is coming up, I can say, okay, based on what I've heard here, I'm reflecting their own problems back to them. I'm reflecting their own statements back to them. I believe that I can help you. And here's what I think would help. And I can give sort of an overview of, this kind of, whether it's a service or this kind of session or this kind of program, whatever it is that I'm going to pitch them, I can give them an overview. Um, and then I can ask them flat out, does that sound like it would help with your problem? Now, usually, almost always, the answer is yes, because I took your description of the
Sure.
problem and an answer that will solve that
Yeah.
problem. So I feel like I have sort of implicit buy-in right from the beginning. And they're the ones asking me then, okay, now how do we do that? How do we move forward? What are the next steps? And that's when I can say, I'll put together a more formal proposal that outlines what we talked about. I'll include the packaging and pricing, and I'll send that over for you to take a look at. That is really my process. Is I'm treating that first call not as a chance to pitch that I can help, but to really help them and me understand the problem really clearly so that we both believe I have enough information to help.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense. Do you send them any type of marketing assets before even getting on the call?
Nope. I try not to. I try not to. And again, I don't know if that's the right answer, but what I've found for me is that my website could be amazing, my assets could be amazing, like, but they're going to read it or not, and they're going to interpret it in whatever lens they're looking at it, right? And what I don't want is to get on the phone with someone and have them say, I would like one of those, please, because I don't know if
Mm.
one of those is actually going to solve this
Yeah.
problem, right? So I try to keep my public facing language about the problems that I solve and the things that I can help with, as opposed to, here are packages, here are services. This isn't something you always have the liberty to do. I'm blessed that at this point I'm able to do that by calling on these past examples, but to say, here are the kinds of problems I can solve. If you have a problem like this, I may be able to help you.
Mhm.
And then I'm able to come in, distill the problem, get a clear understanding, and propose a way for us to solve it together. So that's always my approach, because I just feel like I think a lot of people have other problems that they think is a marketing problem. They have a product problem they think is a marketing problem, or they have an organizational problem that they think is a marketing problem. So I want to make sure that I am coming in to solve a problem I can actually solve. And so the best way to do that is to allow me to diagnose it on the call with them than to have them tell me what they need.
That's actually solid advice in a number of ways. I literally this morning had I guess you would call like a discovery call, a pathway call, a
Yeah.
clarity call, whatever you want to call your calls.
Yeah.
I had one of those with somebody, a software company, so a marketing leader at a software company, and he's listing off all his problems. And one of my techniques is like, hey, I want, when you say customer journey or customer, he said a customer experience specifically. When you
Mhm.
say customer experience, I want to make sure that you and I are defining customer experience the same way. Because when I hear customer experience, that means they've already purchased from you. And that's very different than a
Mm.
prospect problem, which is
Mhm.
somebody who has never purchased from you. Their awareness, their understanding is very different. How you flirt with a prospect is different than how you like marry the customer and then try to get them to upsell and cross sell, right? And so
Yeah.
like what I'll try to do, one of my techniques is I'm like, it's almost like the definition game. Are we defining these terms the same? Because I have found, he said, at one point he even said top funnel. I'm like, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. But you
Mm,
said customer experience, but then you said top funnel. So like, are we having a marketing problem where you need more leads? Or
yeah.
are you having a customer fulfillment problem that you think marketing will solve? Exactly what you
Right.
said. And so that was kind of interesting that it was two separate things. He was talking about the user experience post purchase, and he was also talking about wanting more leads on top funnel. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like scope
Yeah.
creep, right?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that some of the folks that we're pitching to or selling to, like they're very well versed in the language of solutions. They're
Yeah.
very well versed in we need a funnel, we need a system, we need a flow chart, we need, they know what the solutions look like, they know what those words are, and so that's what they tend toward, right? We have some sort of issue with our sales, so we need a chart, we need a workshop, we need personal development. They just look at the solutions that are familiar. There's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of times they don't have the language to clearly articulate the problem. And so that's why I think it's so helpful, like you're saying, to kind of get those
Mhm.
definitions. What is the real problem, like, and why, and
Mhm.
why, and why, until they can't get any deeper to figure out what the issue is. Because their response will always be, to go for the solution that they know because it's what they think can solve the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. And of course, and everybody in those first calls have some ego. The ego is speaking more often than not in those early conversations before the
Right.
trust and the rapport has been established.
Which I think makes it all the more important for them to feel heard
Yeah.
and feel like they're asking questions and listening, because at the end of the day, for that exchange to go
Yeah.
well, they need to feel like they're getting what they want,
Yes,
right?
100%. Hey, Rainmakers, it's Veronica, and we'll get back to today's episode. But before that, I have an exciting invitation for all of you aspiring, ambitious marketing leaders. If you are serious about advancing your career in marketing and you're looking for an expert to give you some personal insights, guidance, tips, then I'm going to invite you to schedule a free pathway to promotion call with me. This is a special one-on-one call with just you and me to discuss your current roadblocks in your career, your long-term aspirations and ambition, and the next best step for you and your personal promotion. Head to pathwaycall.com or click the link in my show notes to schedule your free Pathway to Promotion call. Now back to today's episode. Okay, so you did say something that makes me feel wildly not what you said, but just like, here we go. You said,
Yeah.
I know my worth and I don't put the expectations of pricing myself on that first call. And as soon as you said
Hmm.
pricing myself, like,
Yeah.
okay, pricing yourself. What a
Yeah.
topic. That is a form, like, that's where I will feel the most prostitute where it's like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, like I'm worth 2,500. I'm worth 15,000. Like, ooh, this took me a really long time. And because what you're offering is your wisdom and your brain, and there's no objective calculator that can tell you what it is, how do you do it? Do you have a process? How do you price yourself?
So I have a lot of different thoughts around this. So
Please.
when I first started out, I was doing a lot of hourly based, where I was a consultant, I was on retainer, like it was sort of for my time, right? And obviously that's not scalable.
Yep.
As I got more comfortable, I moved to more of a deliverable based model, where it was we'll work together, and when I deliver this guide, this plan, this strategy, this whatever, like that is the fulfillment of the thing.
Okay.
Now I really focus less on deliverable and more on, again, solving the problem to the degree that I'm able to solve it. And that sometimes means I don't know what the things are that I'm pitching going into the call, which is why I always say, okay, let me go back now that we've talked about this, and I'll propose the right mix of things that can help address this problem. That does a couple of things. One, it gives you flexibility. So you don't want to say, I'm going to do it with a training. Then you have the discovery call and discover like these folks need way more than a training. And I've
Mm-hmm.
already anchored at a certain low price that I now have to contend with. But it also gives you a chance to get a sense of the budget if you can on the call. One of my favorite questions is to ask, what is the budget you have allocated to solve this problem?
Sure.
Because it does a really good thing. It said the budget's not for me. Like, it's not about me. I'm not asking you how much I'm worth. I'm asking how much is this problem and a solution worth to you, right? Like, what is the budget set aside to solve this, or what is the budget set aside to address this problem? And the truth is that the budget may be nothing, which
No
is a good
problem.
thing for you to know, right? The budget may be huge, and that means that you can feel really comfortable with, asking what you're worth, or the budget may be right in the right arena, and now you can have a comfortable amount of tension in what you're proposing. So they don't always have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll give a range, but it's really helpful. I get an answer much more than you'd think you would when
Mm-hmm.
you're asking, like, okay, what is the budget for solving this problem for you? Another way to ask it is, how much would it be worth to fix this? Like, if you could XYZ magical outcome, what would that be worth for your company? Like, what difference would that make in your bottom line? So you can get a sense of the value of
Mm-hmm.
what it is you're proposing. But the truth is, like, my pricing has honestly, I'm sure it started too low. And my rule for myself has always been, if I quote a price for something and I don't get pushback three
Yeah.
times, it's time for me to raise my price.
Uh-huh.
So that's honestly, like, that's how it worked. When I first started speaking, it was, I'd ask for $1,000 to cover my expenses, right? And when I didn't get pushback on that from folks who had worked with me, then it was, well, now it's 2,500, and now it's 5,000, and now it's 7,500, and I just continued to move up until I got a comfortable amount of pushback. And when I stop getting pushback on the fee I'm charging now, I will raise it again, because my value and my ability to deliver that
Yeah.
value is growing, right? So that's not an exact art or science, I know, but as much as you feel comfortable and like the market will sustain, and then listen for a comfortable amount of pushback. It's actually good if you get pushback sometimes,
Yeah.
because if you're not getting pushback, it means you're not charging enough for the value you're providing.
I did the same thing. I've
Yep.
literally increased my prices because I'm like, the marketplace will tell me.
Yep.
That's basically
Yeah.
been my,
And here's the other thing, like, I don't think people talk about this enough. Like, there are a lot of other forms of value beyond money. If you give someone a price that they can't afford, they're not going to say, "Oh, sorry, bye." They're going to ask, like, "Is there something else we can do for you? We only have this much. How could we fill that gap?" I can't tell you how many creative ways someone will find to fill the gap between what you're asking and what they can provide, if they really want to work with you, right?
Mm.
They may provide you an introduction to 3 of their top clients that would make good clients for you. They may be able to provide you video testimonials that are going to
Mhm.
be insanely valuable on your
Mhm.
website. They may be able to, I don't know, I've had speaking engagements where they couldn't meet my full fee, but they were able to play with their travel budget to upgrade me to first class, to fly my husband out with me, to give me 2 extra
Yeah,
days
because
at
they
the
had the
hotel.
points or
And,
whatever.
like, that's valuable too, you
Mhm.
know? So I would say, just, like, don't be so nervous to ask too much, because they're not going to just never reply to
Mhm.
you. They're not going to
Mhm.
just be like, "Well, you're a diva, I'm gone." No, the worst case scenario is they come back and say, "That's out of our budget for this particular project." And then you can come back if you want to and say, "I can offer a one-time discount of this much if you're willing to give me, 3 testimonials at
Mhm.
the end of the project." That's at your discretion.
Do you ever do tier pricing?
In what
Or is
way?
it always just like, so like, let's say you have this initial discovery call and you
Mhm.
scope it out and you feel really comfortable about so then you do your second call and you're like, okay, here's my proposal, here's my price. When
Yep.
you do the price, is it just one price? Or have you ever done like an accordion of like, if we start off
Mm,
modestly, it looks like this type of a commitment. If you're looking to accelerate your ROI or the solution to your
yeah.
problem, and we were way more ambitious and aggressive
Mhm.
than this. Like, have you ever done like some type of accordion of offer?
So I have, but because a lot of the way my early sales process is set up, I'm viewing my proposal as, I'm proposing what the correct solution is, like what I think we should do. What I do offer almost always is, I will say, like, here's what I think we need to do to solve this problem. I will have an optional retainer as an option at the end that they can opt into at a future date,
Smart.
even, that says, if
Smart.
at the end of this implementation you want ongoing help, here's what that could look like: X dollars a month for however many phone calls
Smart.
or something.
Smart.
Um, and I also almost always will offer a cheaper overall investment if they pay everything up
Of
front.
course. Yeah.
So, just a ballpark, like, if this project is going to cost $20,000 over however many months, if you pay it all up front, it's only 17,500.
Yeah.
And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, like, we all want money in the bank, and if they'll pay a cheaper price up front, that's great. But also, then you don't have to chase down invoices. You don't have to do 6 rounds of invoicing and following up and paperwork and all that. But even more than that, I found that most finance departments have some sort of rule that says, if they are offered a cheaper amount to pay in full,
The
that
company
they
would
almost always
prefer.
have to take it. Correct. So for me, that's just like, again, that's working around, like, I'm not great at remembering to send invoices and follow up. So that's something I'm working around by saying, look, if I can optimize toward getting it all up front, that saves me working on something that's not my strong suit.
Actually, that's a really golden tip. Thank you very much. How have you, capacity is always an issue, especially
Hmm.
for anyone who's also managing not just your professional life, but your personal life and your family and
Hmm.
your,
Yeah.
those things, those type of other lovely commitments. How have you managed your capacity for all the things? Because this is where you can get into the territory of burnout and overwhelm and things.
I mean, poorly is probably the most accurate.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to pretend I have all that figured out. I think there's a couple of things that I try to keep in mind. One is being really honest with my clients and with myself, which is, if someone's working on a project and they're saying, "Hey, we need this done by the end of September," and I say, "I'm going to have 2 weeks of no daycare in September, so best I can do is October." Like just being honest. People say yes so much more than we think. Like we're so afraid, I think, and maybe even more so early on when things are tight or you're more afraid of losing a client. People are human. Like they're
Mhm.
so much more willing to negotiate, to accommodate, to understand, and react as a human if you just ask. So I'm not afraid to ask anymore because, again, worst case they say is no. And like, if I can't do it, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I let them opt out instead of opting myself out, if that makes sense, right? Like, let me ask them for an extension or for more time or whatever before we commit. And if they say no, they say no. But at least I've asked and tried to make that work, right?
Mm.
The other thing is, like, I mean, we mentioned this earlier, like spousal selection is really important. Like,
So
like
good.
the the reality is that like running your own thing is incredibly difficult and incredibly stressful
Yeah.
and incredibly consuming and time consuming. So I am very blessed that I have the ability to talk to my partner and say, "Look, I need to go to California for 4 days in a couple weeks. Like, does that work? Can we do that?
Mhm.
Can we make this work?" Like, that's the other thing that's really important is just being on the same page, being willing to compromise, um, and creating some sort of limits. So, my daughter is 4 and she measures my trips in sleeps. How many sleeps will I be gone?
Oh,
Right. So my rule is always I will try to be gone for as few sleeps as possible. That's my rule. So when I'm booking travel, like my assistant knows, like that's what we're looking for. How few sleeps can I be away? Even if I have to get up at 3 in the morning to leave so that I stay here for bedtime, even if I have to race straight to the
yeah.
airport to get back in time for bedtime, like that's what I'm doing. So I'm still traveling. It's probably not as luxurious as it could be, but my rule is I will be home for as many sleeps as I can, and I try to plan my trips around that.
I
So
love that.
everyone's rules I think are going to be different, but like understanding those priorities and trying to keep them, top of mind when you're doing things like that are really helpful. And again, I can't tell you how many clients I've said, "Hey, look, I will just say, just like I did here, I
Yeah.
said, I've got a little one at home. My rule is to try to be home for bedtime. Can we start earlier in the day so that I can leave by lunch and make it back in time?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, no problem. We could start at 8 instead of 10." Like, okay, cool. Perfect. We're good.
Wow.
You
That's
know?
awesome.
But if I don't have that like rule for myself, I don't even have the inclination to ask, and then my schedule starts to control me.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, 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 and yes. Yeah, as a mom of two boys, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the older they get, the more, I mean, when they're little, you're the one that's crying on the plane leaving.
Oh yeah, yeah,
They're with grandma, grandpa, or whoever with the dog. Like they're just
yeah,
thrilled, like they're just playing.
yeah.
But yeah, you start getting the territory of the 4, the 7, the 10. Like now, if my trips are too close to each other,
Hmm.
the words will be like, again, you're leaving us
Hmm.
again. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
kill me. Like, jeez,
yeah,
like just
yeah,
sucker punch me in the heart. So yes, I mean, thankfully with virtual, you have more virtual flexibility, which I like to
yeah.
offer a 10, but whew.
I mean, the other thing too is like, and this will be different depending on your family situation, your kids, is like, we also try to make it special when
Mhm.
I come home. So, I mean, I'm not in the business of buying a bunch of trinkets, but like my daughter really loves chocolate. And
Mhm.
so every trip I try to buy, it doesn't have to be huge,
Yeah.
like a Hershey bar from the airport. Like if I come home with chocolate, that's like a little reward that I've come home, I brought her something, she's excited, and like it's made it worth the trip for her, right? The other one is seashells. If I go anywhere near a beach, like I got to bring back
Cute.
seashells, and like all is well, right? Same with my husband, and we try to do breakfast together the morning after I get back if we can, right? If schedules
Yeah, yeah,
allow,
yeah.
it's like let's have breakfast, just the two of us, like catch up on life, spend some quality time.
Gosh,
You
yeah.
know, obviously your situation, everyone's situation is different, but if you are going to be required to travel or not be present as much as you'd like to be,
Yeah.
then like having a plan in place to say, well, how do I reconnect? How do I reinsert myself into, you know, the flow of life at home when I
Yeah.
haven't been there for a week? You know, how do I reconnect with the kids or, you know, with my partner, with my dog, like whatever it is, just having that plan in place makes it a lot easier all around.
Well, yeah, and I think what I'm learning or what I'm hearing too is just, the intentionality behind it all. Like you're being very intentional
Yeah.
to create a positive experience with your daughter, that when mommy leaves, she also comes back with bearing gifts, or
Yeah.
the intentionality of reconnecting with your spouse, because we don't want to not have that be the priority, because it obviously trickles down to our children, right? So I
Yeah.
love the intentionality. I want to ask you like one more question, and then we always save the last question for you, the guest, to ask me whatever you want.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, I guess I could ask you all the questions, but I guess if you were sitting with a prospective rainmaker and they're telling you, like, let's say this is a coaching call, because this is,
Mhm.
my world all the time, is like,
Mhm.
I want to land 3 strategic clients. What would be your number one tip, or what would come out of you if that was the question that was posed to you?
I mean, the first question I would probably ask is, what's your conversion rate?
Okay.
Because if you, and I don't, you may not know the answer, but it's a really good way to point out that a lot of times if we want 3 new clients, we think of 3 and pitch 3. And that's usually not how the math works.
Mm-hmm.
If I need 3 prospective clients, I can assume, even just ballpark, that like I'll only close 30% of those calls,
Yeah.
which means I need to make this many
Yep.
calls. And of the email outreach, I'll only get calls out of this many, and just work backward to say, okay, well, then I need a list of 27 companies if I want to try to close 3. I feel like that's a much more, it may seem like more work, but in a way it's actually simpler
Yeah.
because you're breaking it down to its smallest parts. And I think a lot of us, when we're goal focused, we're thinking very much about the future, the outcome, like the 3 key clients, and not reversing back to, well, what does that look like in terms of
The
calls, in
full
terms of
process.
outreach? Yeah, exactly. um, the other thing I would probably say, and I recommend recommending books is like one of my love languages, you know. There's a book by Phil M. Jones
Mhm.
called Exactly What to Say, which is absolutely one of my favorite books for sales and prospecting. Not only is it like a kick in the pants and a hug and a high five to like encourage you to go out and like really pitch yourself more assertively, it also walks you through some strategies to feel more confident in those situations, like simple word swaps. Like, he's the one who's been a big champion. He's a friend of mine, you know, luckily, and has always told me, ask for budget. Just ask what the budget is. Worst they can say is, I don't know. But if you get that information, it puts you in a much better position. So what's your conversion rate, so you can reverse back into it and then pick up exactly what to say, so you know exactly what to say.
Gosh, I love that. But I'm such I love, love, love books. So I'm like highlighting like that. I'm like, yeah, exactly what to. So, because there's like the science of selling. There's, never split the difference. There's a lot of great books out there. So when a really smart marketer tells me one of their favorite books, and like it gets bumped up to the top of the list
Oh yeah.
immediately, right?
Well, and I'm a word person, so like exactly what to say. So Phil is actually my co-author on my most recent book
Okay.
on Prove It.
Okay.
But yeah, good friend of mine, and just the power of small word swaps that
Hmm.
make you feel better, that get better results. Like, it's really good.
Yeah, it equalizes the relationship, which is
Yeah.
so critical. Okay, your turn. What
Okay.
would you, for our final question, anything that you would like to put me on the hot seat for?
Can I ask a two-part
You can
question?
ask whatever you want.
Okay. All right. So part one
Okay.
is, I am going on our business retreat. Imagine. What 3 books do you think I should bring with me?
Some of my favorites. Well, how about this? What season of life are you in?
I mean, I'm in a reflection
Yep.
and growth and pivot,
Okay.
and just
Okay.
I'm following my bliss, if as it were.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So I will tell you, hands down, one of my favorite, favorite, favorite books is that I think really changed it for me from soliciting my zone of excellence and proficiency and competence to like really being unapologetic about my zone of genius, was The
Hmm.
Big Leap by Gay
Mm,
Hendricks. Because like Einstein time is real, being in flow is real. Also, the way that we self sabotage is very real. And he outlines all of that in the book and then some. And that
got
was
it.
really important to me. I didn't realize how much I was resting on my external success which is really just a reflection of my proficiency and excellence, not actually where I'm the most gifted. So there was that. Another great book, which is more on the therapy spectrum. So stick with me here, but it's the one.
I'm here.
So I've really been getting into IFS, which is internal family systems, that modality where you have lots of parts. And the more that you can converse with the parts, the more you actually like are a fully regulated, aware human being. And so anything to do with IFS and like the practice of knowing thyself and all of your parts and what activates your parts has been wildly beneficial for me as a mother, as a wife, as a provider, as a coach, as a consultant. Oh man, when I'm in a conversation with somebody and I realize that their protector parts are conversing with me, I'm like, uh-oh. I immediately have to change how I'm speaking to them because it's not going to be productive if I know they're on edge, right? And then the last kind of key and I've been reading so much practical books right now on like marketing strategy. So I don't want to get into that arena, but the one that I really like a lot, and I'm not even like a military fanatic, is Extreme Ownership by Jocko and Leaf. Oh. First of all, the book has some really cool stories from their experience as Navy SEALs in Iraq, but just the concepts of like extreme ownership without victimizing yourself, like woe is me, I screwed up, it's all my responsibility, versus also being too arrogant or too, where you're leading too much with the ego. Just that right balance of like, no, I'm, when something bad happens, good, like just a different perspective. So those books to me are some of the ones I've consumed the fastest, that I've loved the most.
Love it. I am actually going on a business trip to grow. And so I will actually bring some of those.
Sweet.
My second part question is for you, and that is, what is something completely outside the realm of work, marketing, rainmaking that brings you joy?
So the happiest place on earth for me is an investment property that we bought in Surf City, North Carolina, called the Sea Glass Lookout. It's like a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom townhouse, right? It's called Front Row. Like it's right on the beach. It's, if you've ever seen the movie like Dan in Real Life, where like the whole family like piles into, and they take walks on the sand and they're all bundled up and they do like, Pilates in the front porch or whatever. So our townhouse is not the most glamorous beach house you'll ever find in the entire world. It's very cozy and very homey, but it's the happiest place. We often rent it out when we're not personally using it, but in the winter it's dead. No one rents the beach. They don't want to go to the beach when it's cold. However, we do. And so some of my most cherished memories is this place. And I go with the kids and I go with the pup and I go with the spouse and I try to invite people. I often will host my own peer business retreats. So like I don't charge anybody to come. Everybody just gets themselves there with all their miles and their points. And then we just sit in pajamas and no makeup and just brainstorm with each other. I'm hosting one in December and it's like some of the smartest marketers I've ever known. And it's just pure bliss to be able to do this in one of the most beautiful places in the earth to me. And so that gives me an insane, every time I go, I get a little choked up leaving.
That's so wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's really, it just is. It's really, really special. And I even, because I'm extra, it has its own website and Instagram and all the things, but I made the boys into animated pirates and then made a custom pirate flag. And so when we go to the house, we hang the flag. Yep. And it's this sea foam color flag. And it has the two of them as pirates at the center of it. And it says Sea Glass Lookout. So anytime you see the flag out, you know that we're personally there and enjoying the space.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome.
That's because I'm extra.
That's great.
Oh, man, I love it that much. I'm so on brand.
That's a core memory.
Yeah, it is a core memory. I hope the kids think of that, like that it's like, because they're going to remember these moments more than anything else,
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How can people obsess about you as much as I have? How can people connect with you, work with you, learn from you? Obviously, there's the creatorkitchen.com, but like what other means would you tell them to connect with you?
Yeah. So you can find my website is melaniediesel.com, Deziel, if that helps you remember the spelling, melaniediesel.com. And that has everything about my books that I've written, working with me, speaking, And if you're interested at all, I am also writing completely separate from all of this. Speaking of not even our
Mhm.
business selves, I was diagnosed as autistic a couple years ago. And so I've been writing this newsletter, super vulnerable, super
Yeah.
personal, talking about that journey and what that's like. And it's been a lot of fun for me as a creative project that's totally different from my day to day. So that's called the Late Diagnosed Diaries on Substack.
That's good for you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I would never have, like, known. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly why I think it's so interesting is it's become a special interest of
Yeah.
mine. It's like, well, how do so many women go through their
Yeah.
whole lives not knowing this
Knowing.
thing? And because I'm not alone. There's a lot of us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, I love
Yeah.
that. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you
Yeah.
for your willingness to be vulnerable with your own, situation. That's takes
Yeah.
guts.
I'm try I as you have heard, I'm going for radical honesty.
Yeah.
I think it makes the whole landscape a lot better, makes everyone feel a lot better of themselves when we realize that whoever you're looking at on Instagram or
Yeah.
wishing your business looked like they have their own
Yeah.
struggles too. Like we're all just people trying to figure it out as we
Yeah.
go.
100%. And yes, amen to that on a Monday. Thank you. So,
Mhm.
Melanie, thank you so much for being on today's Rainmaker podcast. Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at Via Romney if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.